Welcome everyone to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. This week, since there's been so much happening in the world, I thought I'd take a look at the card and rune energies coming up for this April and May period. Now, we've had a number of what I think of as rather profound and potentially world-shifting events in the last few weeks. Things like Saudi Arabia and a coalition of Arab states attacking their southern neighbors in Yemen, German plane crashes, which are being blamed on a mentally ill co-pilot who chose to commit mass murder, as well as his suicide. We still don't know this for sure, but this is the way it's looking. There are a lot of other things going on as well, like the atomic talks between the US and Iran, which seem to be dragging out. I'm recording this on Thursday, April 2nd, and they just keep going on day to day. They keep getting extended another day. But this is a very important I think, peace talk going on. We have continued financial struggles in Greece, various political and financial things going on in the US, both with politicians and with corporations, and a lot of economic stuff going on. A drought emergency just being declared in California, where they're going to ration water for the first time. Russia's threatening against NATO, not just if they continue to meddle in the Ukraine, but also if they allow troops to be placed in the Baltics, which are part of NATO. And, and finally, some really increasingly dire news literally leaking out from Japan about Fukushima. Lots of things going on here. So any or all of these events could spiral off into some serious changes in geopolitics. And with all that, we haven't even touched on the other potentials like possible severe earth events, like volcanoes or earthquakes, or even severe weather problems. So I thought it was really time for a check-in. Now, with that in mind, I did the cards and runes, and what shows up here is really more of a repeated explanation of the energies driving current events right now, more than it is predictions of actual coming attractions. I'll make a few guesses at some of those too, but this reading particularly is consistent in the energies that it just keeps flagging over and over again, as if trying to pound a message into our heads. Now, I learned in the past 30 years of doing readings that when the forecasting tools you're using, whether it's cards or runes or a crystal ball or whatever it is your favorite tool, if they keep repeating a message over and over, it's time to really sit down and listen. Think and be aware, and even if you don't totally understand the specifics of what the reading means at the time, usually in a fairly short period, all will become perfectly clear, and it then makes complete sense when the actual events start unfolding. I feel this is likely the case over the next 2 or 3 months here. So with that, I'm just going to dive into the reading and give all my listeners the same heads up on the energies and things to look out for. Again, the events were probably much more likely to be much more obvious as to what they are, as exactly what they are as time goes on here. So in this reading, I phrased the question a certain way. Regular listeners know that I often vary my general question slightly, because word changes really can affect the outcome. In general, the more specific you are on a topic, the more likely it is the cards or runes or other tool are going to give you a more specific answer. But in this case, I just kind of had a general feeling about that something's coming. And also, when you see this reading, you'll realize how it fits in with some of the previous readings. You may want to go back and listen to both my predictions for the coming year and the shows that I've done with Lynn and a couple of other, and Lada, because I think you'll find it all kind of fits together really nicely. But I said I was trying to be as general as possible because I didn't want to put too many structures on this reading. But I also wanted to keep it to a short time period because I don't actually know when things are coming, but I think that they're developing pretty quickly. And I thought, giving us an idea of this 2-month window would give us a clue as to what may be coming up, at least for that time period. So anyway, what I asked was, what are the main energies or events coming up for the next couple of months, April, May 2015? There it is. Very short time window, relatively speaking, but not really putting a exact stamp on exactly what I'm looking for, just to see what's out there. And this is what I got. The first thing I see all over this reading is wild emotions, fear, or experience of things going out of control, conflicts, and defensiveness. Now, where have we heard that before? Some of the other readings, but this time it's a little more clear. I'll go into the reasons for all of these statements I just made in a moment, but I'm going to start out by saying the overall picture for the next couple of months is definitely one of tension, conflicts, arguments, and emotional reactions rather than much needed critical thinking. And yes, I reshuffled the cards from several months ago. I know this is kind of an ongoing theme, but this time it's really powerfully there. There are some bright spots in all this, which I'll also cover. But overall, this next couple of months is going to be a time period where it will be a good idea, especially for individuals, us as people, to stay as calm and rational as possible. And that's not always going to be easy, because it's going to be in the face of what other people and even the institutions, possibly even nations around us, are going to be throwing at you. But I think that is one of the main themes here is, we can't control the world, but we do have some control over how we choose to meet what's happening in it. But first, to break this down, first we'll go over the side cards. As a group, we have the Stars, the Castle Tower, Friendship, the Scales, and the Beast. This is a real mixed bag of positives and negatives, and I'm going to look first at the Stars card, just do each card individually from there so you get the whole idea. The Stars card shows a group of stars connected by lines to form patterns. As the lead card in the reading, it sets out the tone and gives us an overview for the entire time period, what it's about, and in this case, it's between connections. Connections between people, places, things, organizations, anything that can be connected, as well as the patterns of interaction they may have or are going to be having soon. Now, connections can be positive, negative, or neutral, but in the coming 2 months, I think the topics of connections of every sort are going to be in the news headlines, from new discoveries in the sciences, how things fit together or they don't fit together, very, very positive stuff there potentially, to the agreements, alliances, and treaties between sovereign states and corporate empires, as well as individuals. Look for more businesses to be taken over, or at least be in merger talks during this period, and not all of this is going to be happy or mutual. I'm thinking right now in Ireland, for example, this could be reflected in the national airline being in on again, off again talks with various other airlines about whether it's going to be swallowed up by them or not. And it's like no one's really happy about this, but it's probably going to happen eventually. During this 2-month time period is a time when that sort of thing is just going to continue and possibly become even stronger. Now, this is also a time when strong emotional connections can be made, both real and imagined. So it's a great time for finding a romantic partner. But it's also a really good time for conspiracy theories. Now, I'm not at all implying that all of this second type of connection will be in someone's imagination either. The old saying, it doesn't mean you're paranoid if they really are out to get you, and I think there's going to be a certain amount of that either. But it's going to be a time period when it would be really easy to see connections and relationships to things everywhere. It's nearly everything. And yes, well, that may be true on some great cosmic level. On the Earth's plane, some of these things are going to be really worth paying attention to in terms of actual connections, and others may be more disillusioned or perhaps even more desired or hoped for than actual real connections, because again, that energy is pushing everyone to see everything is connected, and some of it, it's just going to be, you've got to really use discernment in deciding which is what you really want to pay attention to, and what may be just kind of interesting but probably isn't real. So with this backdrop of everything connected to everything, like the old song, and I'm thinking leg bones connected to the thigh bone, we come to the next card, which I think is a knee-jerk response to all this connection energy, which is defensive and protective, withdrawing into the castle tower. Now, this is a safe place, surrounded by high walls, and located up on a hill for great safety. It is also the opposite of connections, in the sense that you're being set apart and safe, but alone. Or at least alone with others of like mind. You're not bothered or under attack from people that don't agree with you. This makes the world not a place where everyone is connected, but rather a place of individuality or tribal identity and separateness. It is perfectly normal for energies to try to balance each other out in this way. Now, I've talked before about how really everything tends to boil down to energies tipping back and forth, trying to do just that, trying to balance. But it's unusual to have such stark and opposing energies right next door to each other, especially at the start of the same reading. This suggests that the next 2 months are going to be a push-pull in terms of energies that push us towards connecting with other people, places, or things, and yet being pulled back to wanting to be alone, protected, and safe with like-minded people, places, things, or even thought patterns that we already understand and are familiar with. And both of these opposing trends have a direct impact on the next card, which is that of friendship. In a current events reading, friendship is usually more than just a relationship between an individual and a few people, although those are going to be very important, and I don't want to drop that. You know, your friends are going to be, again, part of that tribe for you, the really close friends, so keep that in mind. But even then, it's not on an individual level. It can be important, but most of the time in the current events reading, these friendships or relationships are between nations, blocks of nations, tribes or large groups of people, or even certain ideas and movements like political, artistic, or otherwise easily identifiable sorts of things that people sort of sign up for in the way that they think, dress, present themselves to the world, whether you're a yuppie or a goth or, you know, a businessman or a lady of the society, that kind of thing. You know, it's that sort of self-directed group identity. However, I'm inclined to read this mostly, in this reading, as the friendship between peoples and nations or national blocks for the strongest impact in this reading. Some of the reasons for this are the next cards, which is the scales, which is like the scales of justice, or events sort of hanging into balance, decisions being made and weighed. The outcome isn't quite reached yet because it's not quite all there, but it's almost like I get this image of things kind of lining up. And again, we've had this before. If you go back and look at some of the other readings, you'll see the last year or so has been kind of building in this general direction, but now I think it really gets serious. This card is followed directly by the Beast, which is a card that has a picture of a raging dragon coming down the hallway. And it's a symbol for deep-set, inner, dark, and raging emotions that everybody has inside, but that we usually keep in check as adults. Now, we have to acknowledge that they're there, or they can come out from behind the door and get us. But after about the age of 2 to 4, one of the things that we learn as we grow up, it's the appropriate time to express them and how, rather than, but think of this card as a 2-year-old having a tantrum, and you get a really good idea of the feel of this card. Yeah, other examples of emotions commonly flagged on are jealousy, lust, anger, violence, revenge, and even cruelty, that sort of thing. This card can also suggest actions taken that are based purely on out-of-control emotions rather than critical thinking or fact-based reasoning. This is worse than thinking with your heart rather than your head. This is acting out again with that inner toddler rather than thinking like an adult and graduating it then and bumping it up to the world stage. So think of world leaders and such, as I heard once on a Radio Sweden program that was a comedy show, of little kids in a sandbox throwing things at each other. And that's kind of and it maybe not just toys yet, but they throw insults and they, tell each other their mother wears combat boots or they've got poopy pants or whatever, none of which is really true, but they just keep, and neither one is really listening to the other, but they're also 5 years old. Now think of that up on an international scale, and you've got a real feeling of what this card is giving me an image of for this time period. So I think together, these 5 cards really seriously come out as a set this time. Though, as we shall see, the other cards and runes also echo them. That's what I meant about this repeating. But basically, what you have here in these first 5 cards is a foundational push-pull between connections or alliances, if you prefer, and the defensive retreating, all acting on the directions and decisions made between international friends or blocks, corporations, banks, ethnic groups, you name it. And while these decisions are hanging into balance or being weighed, while they're being decided and thought about, and some things put high on one side and some groups valuing something else, the greatest pressure is going to be on those making the decisions to think with their deepest base emotions, exactly reacting rather than using either their hearts or their brains. It's just going to be the real sort of animal, dragon, dinosaur reaction. That doesn't mean everybody will act on that, but that's where the energy is. So it's a very, very volatile and dangerous time period. Translated into current events, this looks like where we see the breaking up of old alliances and friendships, not always for viable or well thought out reasons, but often simply from this emotional reaction of leaders or sort of people in charge or blocks people in the same way, just going off on in some weird way. The same way new friendships or alliances may form between various people, tribes, or nations, even banking systems, you name it. But again, there will be pressure on these to form not from rational reasoning or a good idea, but just from deep-seated emotional reasons, often even over practical ones. Now, some of these alliances agreements that come out of these emotional earthquakes may end up having practical or useful applications in the long term, but that's likely to be a lucky accident. And I have this feeling that not everything that sorts out during this period is going to be that lucky. But some of it will, and this is another reason for paying close attention and not immediately yourself jumping to an emotional reaction of everything is awful. Because, again, what our message is for us to stay calm and observe, even if everybody else isn't. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages.
Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Okay, so now we've got the basic message of the side cards, but now we're going to move on to our kitty cat cards, which I've got a couple of, from the Cat's Eye Tarot deck. And later on, we'll do the runes to fill in a few more details. But first, we have the 5 of kitty wands. And this shows a litter of 5 young kittens play fighting and attacking each other. If you've ever seen this, when kittens do this, it's very, very cute. They're practicing to be adult cats when sometimes they may actually have to fight intruders, and they also have to learn to pounce and run and catch prey because, you know, kitties in the wild, they don't have people to bring them food bowls, and so this is part of their instinct to learn how to do this. Now, some of the kittens in this particular card, if you look at it, if you go up and look up the Cat's Eye Tarot, you'll see that the kittens seem to be having a good time, but some of the other kittens obviously are not having a good time. This is not what they want to be doing. There's one that obviously wants to be left alone, and there's another one that just really doesn't want to be there, and is kind of looking up like, oh my god, what's happening now? And it's sort of like the first 2 cards in this other reading. You've got this, so, you know, 2 of the kittens really want to play, and the other 2 are like, one wants to run and go away somewhere else, and the other one is kind of afraid of what's coming. Very, very interesting just in the picture. The little booklet that comes with this deck of cards has the keywords for this particular card as disagreement, competition, and confrontation, which fits in pretty well with the basic readings from the side cards. Well, sometimes these conflicts may be playful or petty. Other times they're going to morph into things that are much more serious. And if you've ever seen a group of kittens, you know this can happen sometimes. They get, particularly being young and they don't, new to life, sometimes you kind of have to like step in as a cat owner and take them to their little rooms, so to speak, either actually or metaphorically, because you'll be listening and all of a sudden you hear what goes from play fighting into some really serious stuff. And it's because they don't have control because they're babies. Usually the mama cat just comes and pulls one of them away. But if you don't have a mama cat, then you have to do that. But in any case, the world is kind of low on mama cats at the moment. I think it's kind of part of this. Anyway, a major problem for individuals during this period is simply going to be sorting out what is the seriously important stuff, where you need the mama cat, and what's merely annoying. And this task gets made harder when a great deal of the outside energies are likely to just be a bit annoying to start out with. I think that part of the castle card in the previous reading is going to be a tendency, and I understand it because I feel it myself, just want to say to heck with it, go shut the door, go into your nice, secure castle and play video games or read science fiction novels or whatever it is that you do to sort of block out the world, because that it's just getting too much. And you see this with the kittens as well. On an international scale, this is going to be a huge issue. And we're likely to see news outlets scrambling to figure out which shattered international friendship or new economic alliance or weird connection to report on next. And again, what's important or what isn't, even the news outlets won't be able to figure it out. Look for a lot of individuals as well as national populations to also start feeling out of control and rather helpless during this period. That's because of our next card, the Eight of Swords. We've already seen a lot of reasons for this, but the Eight of Swords really magnifies this. Now, on the Eight of Cat's Eye Swords, we have an Eight of Kitty Swords, and we've had her before. She's a very unhappy adult Siamese cat. She's so upset with this new situation in her life, and all she can do is sit there and meow. She can't even, really move. She's just frozen in place. The observer sees a baby gate on the card and a pacifier, and it's obvious to the human looking at the card that the humans have had a child, but the kitty is totally confused by this. She feels her entire ordered and structured world is totally out of her own control. The key words on this card are restriction, confusion, and feelings of powerlessness, which pretty well describes how I think a lot of people are going to feel during this time period. That said, all is not lost, because another message of this card is, when things are totally out of your own control, you have to realize you cannot let your emotions control your actions. But rather, you have to sit down, breathe, and think rather than just react, and then with conscious forethought, decide to get up and take a step in the direction you want to go. As individuals, we have to accept that the beast is there, that there are a lot of things flying around that we can't really do anything about. But rather than reacting with undirected and venting emotions or simply freezing and just meowing, the way forward is to calm down, sit down for a while perhaps, but logically consider your options. Nations, politicians, corporate CEOs, bankers, and other in powerful positions who actually heed this advice, maybe they get lucky and they hear this show, but for whatever reason, if they listen to this rather than everything flying around, they're going to do a lot better during the next 2 months than people who just go with the flow. I'm going to predict that national acting out during this period in the form of riots, demonstrations, even civil wars in some places breaking out, and people just kind of acting crazy, having personal vendettas, clan wars, just losing it on a personal and public scale is going to be highly likely. There's just, again, because people can only take so much and they kind of snap, and there's all this wild energy flying around from the beast at the same time that people feel out of control and they don't like that. So some people react by just freezing like the kitty in front of the baby gate, others just go crazy, and that's what we're going to be seeing on. So look for those kind of stories. They're going to be a time marker for you. Now, finally we get to the runes, and the runes again pretty much echo the rest of the reading, though they end with both a positive note and a potential warning. The first rune we've seen before. This is our good old friend Manaj, who keeps showing up in these readings. And that's appropriate because this rune is all about human partnerships, alliances, and friendships. When it works well, when the relationship and the contract is positive, it's a highly positive rune. In fact, the ancient rune poem that goes with this rune is man, or in this case, human being, because the Norse only had one word for it, so it's human is the joy of man, or human, so it's humans are the joy of humans. Because friendship, the central card of the Psi card reading, is one of the most joyful and fulfilling things we can experience in our lives as humans when they work, and when they have trust, and when they go well. But when they break down, though, we often get the beast in its nastiest and most destructive form. There are few things more savage than former friends turned enemies. Both possibilities are in this rune, and while I would like to hope for a lot of positive expressions of this rune in the next 2 months, given the other cards, I think that internationally this is less likely, though still possible, than its more negative manifestations. It's more like I feel friends becoming enemies, and in some cases enemies becoming friends, because it's all of this upheaval, changing alliances, and movements that we've been seeing for some months now, but the pace picks up in the next time period. Now, individuals, of course, can use this energy in that positive way. The same way they can work it with the friendship card to help strengthen and enhance those close and trusted friendships that they already have, and cautiously make new ones. Don't let all this make you afraid to reach out to other people. It's just that there's going to be a lot of energy floating around that makes that a little harder. You know, your tendency is going to want to be with people like you rather than people who are different. And you may need to force yourself to step out of that a little bit if you want to keep going. But again, make sure that the alliances you have are clear and good ones, because there's also going to be this tendency, both personally, internationally, for things to, for just, if there's any bad stuff going on in the background, it's going to come out. That's, I'll say that. But finally, we have Sawilo, which is the sun rune, or it could be lightning as well. And this rune gives us both hope and a warning. The sun is a very, very bright rune. It suggests all the things with summer, which is the season following our current spring reading here in the Northern Hemisphere. The sun also exposes things, both good and bad, like the real intentions of friends and enemies, as I mentioned above, which can have, a really strong impact during this time period. The sun rune, Sawilo, can also be associated with all things electrical, nuclear, and that's in every form you can think of, from power, medicine, atomic power, other forms of power generation, power lines, national grids, weapons, and of course the sun herself. And the sun in the Norse, and we're reading the runes here, is female, so she also has a particular influence on feminine energies. So in the Norse, the feminine is more fiery than perhaps it is in some of our other magical and esoteric traditions where the sun is male. But here she's female, and this is where she has her strongest actions. It is, however, this nuclear aspect, and to some degree the electronic aspects, that I feel strongly is a warning during this time period. And not just for the next 2 months, but probably for the entire spring and summer in the Northern Hemisphere. I think in terms of electrics, we're worried about the grids, national grids, and since I wrote this, but before I recorded it, Turkey had a blackout of the entire country now, because I posted this on a forum. Some people did see this, but it didn't really get on the airways, so I'm not going to really quite call it a hit exactly in that sense, but it perfectly shows the energy. That's exactly the kind of thing you can expect during this time. I'm also concerned, this is where we haven't seen almost nothing of weather in this reading, but I think the sun, in terms of weather, both like the drought and also potential for storms, lightning, and wind, and extremes, it's also there. Anything that would involve the sun is an important part of this energy. But getting back to the nuclear stuff, it doesn't mean that, nuclear war or even electronic warfare accidents will happen during this period. But I sense that the potential is there, both in terms of nuclear and cyber attack. Of course, the flip side of this would be, it's a fantastic time for scientists and engineers working on solar power sources, Tesla technology, new uses for atomic power, or even radiation. The energies themselves are neither good or bad, and they can encourage this kind of exploration, discovery, which we already saw a little bit of that on the side card. So there's some really good potentials there as well. But it's just all about what people choose to do with them. And when you have this kind of really outraged, crazy thinking with your, not just with your gut, but with your inner dinosaur going on for a lot of people, it gets harder for it to see the really good manifestations. But I think they're going to be there. Especially the electrical stuff. I would look for things with like electric cars, and again, solar energy may also play a really big part in this period. But I'm also feeling very, very drawn to the drought, particularly in the United States, in California and the Southwest, but also possibly in other areas. Again, just kind of extremes of weather, both in terms of lightning and storm, but also in terms of great heat. And I think that's not just for this next 2 months. I think that's going to be throughout the southern period, especially in the north. I'm not as connected to the southern hemisphere, but you can sort of probably look at some of the same energies are going to play there. And again, I'm particularly concerned about Japan as well. There's a lot of information coming out about that is really very concerning. So just pay attention. But to sum up, the next 2 months, based on all of this, are looking at times of seriously unsettled relationships between people and other things on both the international and individual level. There's just going to be a lot of people that feel the world is spinning out of their control, and they're likely to look for like-minded people to ally themselves with. At the same time, they're going to become defensive, unwilling to make needed changes, or even respond to outside influence if they can avoid them. There's also going to be a strong tendency to blame other people or other things outside of what they are familiar with, because it's human nature to always want to put the blame outside of oneself. Look for headlines, both about new treaties or friendships, but also about conservative and defensive trends and movements, like I said above. A lot of people may simply retreat into their homes during this period and attempt to shut the news out altogether, which for some people may be a really healthy response, and everyone may want to consider this to a degree. You don't want to do it totally, but the temptation is going to be there. This is going to become impossible if you actually have to live in one of the areas that may be caught out in terms of riots or electrical problems or something like that. But for a lot of people, if this doesn't affect them directly, there's going to be, I think, a lot of attitude of just don't bother me with it. Just let me, play my video game. Real and trusted friends will be a great refuge during this period, though everyone will have to be careful of their own internal reactions to feeling like the world is spinning out of control. You just will. Because unchecked, these can result in outbreaks of the beast emotions, which are the destroyers of both lives and friendships out of control. Seriously, we can't stop our leaders, our entire nations from going this route, but we can pay attention and try to check it in ourselves. Many of the future pathways are going to be decided and set. That's the scales card. So this is a real pivotal time period. I don't think it's when the things actually break out that are coming, but they really pieces start falling into place during this time period. And while the affairs of nations may not always be chosen with wisdom and right thinking, you can try to make sure that your decisions are at least based in reality as you see it and some cool-headed reasoning. You can use your emotions or what I call your gut as well. You never should really go against your gut. But your gut is different from your inner beast, and most people can learn to tell the difference. But this is a time period when sometimes our guts may be somewhat reactive and overstimulated, even the good part of us. So they may need a little cool down period before they can be properly searched and understood, which is why meditation is going to be a really big thing during this period. Again, that kind of stopping, and instead of, don't freeze like the kitty in front of the gate, but instead stop intentionally and just sit and breathe and think and be willing to open yourself up to the direction of that still small voice, because that voice is likely to be correct. But your immediate, what's driving you, if you feel driven by something, this is not a time to just go with that kind of flow. Sometimes it is, but this isn't one of them. And because you've heard this show, you're likely to be one of the lucky people who know this is a time period when especially petty conflicts are likely to just blow up, and you do best to avoid them. You know, when people try to get you in arguments and stuff, that things that don't matter, just let them, you know, just let it go. Just go do something else. There's going to be enough real issues on all our plates without making mountains out of molehills, or indeed allowing other people in our lives to do it for us. And see, they don't have this show, so they don't necessarily, and most people are not that self-analytical, so they are more influenced by energies that are out there. The energies don't control us, they just influence us. And if we know what they are, it's a lot easier for us to sort of navigate the river, you know, by putting up the sail or using an oar or just dropping an anchor, than it is if we don't know what's happening at all. This is a time when even playful bantering can very easily become serious and confused, like we saw on the cards. You know, and even adult cats can, you know, get really upset and start, you know, they start out like playful kittens, and then it gets really serious and gets out of control. So that's something you really want to watch in your own life. And, you know, get some popcorn and grab it to sit in front of your TV to see it when it gets out of control on your national scale, because I'm almost certain that it will. But finally, if you find yourself personally feeling trapped in the middle of the floor, like over that baby gate, and you just want to meow your head off, do something positive about it. You can meditate like I described, or if you're really just too down, go to bed early with a good book and a cup of tea. Don't go looking for an argument or get on the internet to figure out who you can argue with, or start reading headlines that just make you feel worse. Just for that evening, just take some time for yourself and do some quiet time. Sometimes the best response is going to be found in that menage room too, that friendship card, where you may want to go out with others of like mind and, you know, have a good time, but people you really trust. But when even that gets too much, retreat to your safe castle and watch from a distance. Especially right now, watching international events, it's going to be good to watch from a distance. Control what you can and simply allow what you can't to flow on as it will, because it's going to happen anyway. The scales are going to tip one way or the other. And as individuals, we can control to some degree, or we can influence how that tips in our lives. We can't really control it, but we can influence it one way or the other. But on an international scale, particularly in times like this, there isn't much we can do. The next couple of months are not going to be easy, but they're not totally dark or gloomy either. In fact, they suggest a rather active energy time period, one where events are building, but have not yet reached their ultimate peak. When you want to avoid the raging storms of the beast, the promise of sunshine suggests happier forms of emotional expression will also be making an appearance. Now, we've talked about active energy periods and passive energy periods. And that's sort of the energies trying to balance one way or balance the other. During an active energy period, there tends to be a feeling of life is moving too fast, things are spinning out of control, but there also can be a great sense of freedom, sort of like flying. Things, you know, if you're like at a task and it may go faster and you don't know how you got it done so quickly, things that you enjoy, they almost seem to go past too briefly. But it can be a very freeing and really wild time in some of the best senses. So again, provided you keep yourself centered so you don't get into that beast energy, this can be a really good time. And all high impact energy periods are almost always followed, or at least eventually morph into a more passive energy period, because things can only go full speed so long, and then they tend to pull back. This is an unusual time in that we have elements of each of these that you can draw on. You can draw on both the rushing forward and connecting and the pulling back into the castle. But on mostly, I feel like the energy is pushing forward, which is again why it's a good time for meditation, breathing, and also you can irk off some of that energy with physical exercise and other personal methods of taking control. But things like swimming, walking, gardening, all these things will help both give you a sense of balance and give you some action to take. All in all, I suspect this is going to be a busy spring build-up to something surprising in the summer, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. It just, it may be also surprising in the winter if you're down under, but there's something about the summer time period that this, or possibly even fall, that this all feels like it's kind of building to. Of course, I thought that was the case last year, and it sort of went back for a while, and now it's building again. But it's definitely, we're in its building period. So I'm going to really do my best to take another look in June, because I don't think we're good. The scales are still going back and forth, and we're just not going to know a lot of certainty. I don't believe the future's fixed, for one thing. I think that particularly geopolitics, where people make decisions, you have decisions of hundreds of thousands of people, sometimes millions of people, that all work together to sort of create this energy. And some decisions have to be made before others can be certain. But once certain decisions are made, then things can sort of somewhat lock. And I feel right now we're in a very fluid period, but the water is sort of like rushing, the wave is sort of rushing in. And when we get to June, we may know where some of it's landed. So we'll take a look then to see how the energies are playing out. I think, however, this show has been, this is enough for now. I just kind of want to do a check-in. I hope next week we'll be back with an interview, and if not, I'll probably do another topical show. I want to thank you for joining us this week, and I want to, send you all off with some really good feelings. Take care of that action, grab it by the tail, and when it gets too much, retreat to your castle and read a good book or watch a comedy show. Meanwhile, we'll get back next week, and I'll see you then here at Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.